I was setting the table for Sunday dinner when my grandson Tyler slipped his small hand into mine. His palm was sweaty, and when I looked down at him, his brown eyes were wider than I'd ever seen them. "Grandma," he whispered, barely audible over the sound of his mother Rachel laughing at something on her phone in the living room. "I need to tell you something important. But not here. Not now." My heart did a strange little flip. Tyler was 8 years old, mature for his age, but he was still just a child. Children don't usually use words like important with that kind of tremor in their voice. "What is it, sweetheart?" I kept my voice light, casual, even though something in his expression made my stomach tighten. He glanced toward the living room, then back at me. "Later, when they leave. Promise you'll listen?" I squeezed his hand. "I promise." That was 3 hours ago. Now I was sitting in my quiet house, the remains of pot roast and mashed potatoes still in containers on the counter, and my mind was racing. My son David had taken Rachel home, promising to come back to help me with the dishes, but I'd waved him off. Tyler had manufactured a reason to stay behind, telling his parents he'd left his favorite book here and asking if he could look for it. The moment the front door closed, Tyler appeared in my kitchen doorway. He wasn't crying, but his face had that pinched, scared look that children get when they know something is wrong but don't understand how to fix it. "Grandma, I heard Mommy talking on the phone yesterday, when Daddy was at work and I was supposed to be napping." He came closer, his voice dropping even though we were alone. "She said bad things. About Daddy. About you." I pulled out a chair at the kitchen table and sat down, gesturing for him to sit next to me. My hands were steady, but inside, something cold and heavy had settled in my chest. "Tell me exactly what you heard, Tyler. Every word you can remember." He climbed into the chair, his legs swinging nervously. She was in her bedroom with the door almost closed. I got up because I was thirsty, and I heard her laughing. Not her nice laugh. The mean one she uses when Daddy can't hear. I knew exactly which laugh he meant. I'd heard it myself, usually followed by some cutting comment about David's salary or how quaint my house was. She said, "He's so trusting, it's almost pathetic. His mother's the same way, sitting on all that money like a dragon hoarding gold." Well, not for much longer. Tyler's voice had taken on a mimicking quality, the way children do when they're repeating something they've heard. Then she said, "My lawyer says it's easier than we thought. Power of attorney, a good doctor willing to sign off on cognitive decline, and boom, access to everything." The cold in my chest spread to my limbs. I forced myself to breathe normally, to keep my face calm for Tyler's sake. "Did she say anything else?" "She said something about someone named Marcus. She said, once we have control of her accounts, we can start moving things. David won't even know until it's too late. And if the old lady puts up a fight? Well, accidents happen at her age." Tyler's voice cracked on the last words. "Grandma, what does that mean? What's a power of attorney?" I reached over and pulled him into my arms. He buried his face in my shoulder, and I felt his small body shaking. "It means your mother is planning something very bad," I said quietly. "But it also means we're going to stop her." I'd been a widow for 3 years. My husband Thomas had died suddenly of a heart attack, leaving me alone in the house we'd built together 40 years ago. The grief had been crushing, but I'd survived it. I had my son David, my grandson Tyler, and enough money from Thomas's life insurance and our investments that I'd never have to worry about finances again. Thomas had been meticulous about our estate planning. Everything was in trusts and properly documented. David was the beneficiary of my will, of course, but nothing could be accessed until after my death, and I'd made sure to work with lawyers who understood the importance of protecting assets from potential gold diggers. Apparently, I hadn't been cautious enough. That night, after David picked up Tyler, I sat in my study and thought about the past 2 years since David married Rachel. I'd met her at a charity gala, a beautiful woman with practiced charm and a laugh that seemed just a bit too loud. David had been smitten. He was lonely after his divorce 5 years earlier, and Rachel had pursued him with the kind of focused intensity that should have raised red flags. But I'd kept my concerns to myself. David was an adult. He deserved to make his own choices, even if I privately thought Rachel was more interested in his architect's salary and his mother's wealth than in building a genuine partnership. Now, sitting in the home office, where Thomas and I had planned our future together, I realized I'd been too polite. too worried about seeming like a meddling mother-in-law. Tyler's words echoed in my mind. Accidents happen at her age. I picked up my phone and called my lawyer, Leonard Mitchell. He'd been Thomas's best friend and had handled all our legal affairs for decades. "Margaret," he answered on the second ring, his voice warm and familiar. "Everything all right?" "Leonard, I need to see you first thing Monday morning, and I need you to bring everything you have on power of attorney abuse, elder financial exploitation, and how to protect myself legally." There was a pause. "What's happened?" "I'll explain everything when I see you. But Leonard, I need you to trust me on this. Something very wrong is happening, and I need to be 3 steps ahead of it. I'll clear my calendar. 9 a.m.? Perfect." The weekend felt endless. I went through the motions of my normal routine, watering my garden, reading the newspaper, preparing meals. But underneath the normalcy, my mind was working constantly. Sunday afternoon, I was in my garden when I heard Rachel's voice calling from the back door. "Margaret? Are you out here?" I stood up from the rose bushes I'd been pruning, brushing dirt from my knees. Rachel was picking her way across the lawn in completely inappropriate heels, her face arranged in what I'd come to recognize as her sweet daughter-in-law expression. "I hope you don't mind me dropping by," she said. "David's working on a project deadline, and I thought we could have some tea. Just us girls." Everything in me wanted to refuse, but I forced a smile. "Of course, come in." In my kitchen, I prepared tea while Rachel chattered about inconsequential things. A new boutique downtown, her yoga instructor, plans for Tyler's upcoming birthday. I let her talk, watching her carefully. She was good, very good. If I hadn't known what I now knew, I would have thought she was making a genuine effort to bond. "You know, Margaret," she said, stirring sugar into her tea, "David and I have been talking about the future, about what's best for everyone." "Oh? You're not getting any younger. This house is so big, so much maintenance. David worries about you here all alone." She reached across the table and patted my hand. "We've been looking at some really lovely assisted living communities. Beautiful places, really. More like resorts. You'd have friends your own age, activities, medical care right on site." I took a sip of my tea, keeping my expression neutral. "I'm only 62, Rachel, and I'm in excellent health." "Of course you are. But prevention is so important, and it would give David peace of mind." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a confidential tone. "Between you and me, I think he's been stressed. All that worry about you, plus his work, plus trying to provide for us. If you moved somewhere with care available and maybe gave him some help with finances now, instead of making him wait for, well, you know." "My death," I said flatly. She had the grace to look embarrassed. "That sounds so morbid. I just mean estate planning, making things easier for everyone. Marcus, my financial advisor, says it's very common for parents to transfer assets before, to avoid estate taxes and complications." "Marcus," I repeated the name. "Your financial advisor." "Yes, he's brilliant, very experienced. I could have him call you, explain the benefits." "That's very thoughtful, Rachel. But I have my own financial advisors, and I'm quite satisfied with my arrangements." Something flickered across her face. Just for a second. Frustration? Anger? Then the sweet mask was back in place. "Of course. I just want what's best for you. For all of us." She finished her tea and stood up. "I should get going. But think about what I said? About the assisted living? I could arrange for David and me to take you on tours this weekend." After she left, I sat at my kitchen table for a long time, looking at the teacup she'd used. The lipstick mark on the rim was perfect, not a smudge out of place. Everything about Rachel was like that, perfectly composed. A performance. Monday morning, I was in Leonard's office at 9 sharp. He ushered me in, closed the door, and sat down across from his desk. "Tell me everything," he said. I did. Tyler's warning, Rachel's visit, the mentions of Marcus and power of attorney and accidents. Leonard's expression grew darker with each word. When I finished, he pulled out a legal pad and started making notes. First, the good news. Thomas was paranoid about asset protection, bless him. Your estate is locked up tight. No one can access anything without very specific conditions being met, and I'm the trustee on everything. Even if someone convinced a doctor you were incompetent, they'd still have to go through me, and I'd fight them every step of the way. And the bad news? The bad news is that if Rachel and this Marcus person are serious, they may try other methods. Isolation, gaslighting, even physical harm disguised as accidents. Elder abuse cases often follow a pattern. First financial exploitation, then escalation if the victim resists. My hands were shaking. I clasped them together in my lap. What do? We gather evidence. We protect you legally and physically, and we build a case. He pulled out his phone. I have a private investigator I've worked with before. Very discreet, very thorough. Let me call him. The investigator's name was James Chen. He came to my house that evening, a quiet man in his 50s with sharp eyes and a way of fading into the background. I'll need everything you can tell me about Rachel, he said. Full name, maiden name, where she worked before marrying David, any friends or associates you know about, and this Marcus person. I told him what I knew, which wasn't much. Rachel Patterson, originally from somewhere in Florida, no family she ever mentioned. She'd worked in retail management before marrying David, or at least that's what she'd said. I'll start with background checks, financial records, phone records if I can access them legally. Meanwhile, Mrs. Holloway, I need you to be very careful. Don't confront Rachel directly. Don't let on that you suspect anything. Can you do that? I thought about Thomas, about the life we'd built, about my son who had no idea his wife was planning to exploit and possibly harm his own mother. Yes, I said. I can do that. The next 2 weeks were the longest of my life. I played the role of the sweet, slightly confused elderly woman. When Rachel suggested another visit to look at assisted living facilities, I agreed. When she brought up Marcus again, I smiled vaguely and said I'd think about it. Meanwhile, James was building a case. Rachel Patterson's background was a patchwork of lies. She'd never worked in retail management. She'd been married twice before, both marriages ending in acrimonious divorces where she'd walked away with substantial settlements. The first husband had been elderly and had died within 3 years of their marriage. The second had been in a convenient accident that left him hospitalized for months, during which time Rachel had cleaned out their joint accounts. No charges had ever been filed, nothing proven. But the pattern was clear. And Marcus Rivera was a disbarred financial advisor with a history of elder exploitation schemes. He and Rachel had been partners before, working together to identify and target wealthy victims. They're good at this, James told me, laying out photographs and documents on my dining room table. They find vulnerable targets, usually through personal connections. Rachel targets the children of wealthy parents, marries them, then works on getting access to the family money. Marcus provides the fake financial services, the fraudulent paperwork. Why David? Why me? You're a widow, perceived as lonely and potentially susceptible to pressure. You have substantial assets, but they're well protected, which is probably why they haven't moved faster. They're trying to figure out how to break through your legal safeguards. And if they can't? James met my eyes. Based on their pattern with previous marks, they escalate. Accidents. Medical events that are hard to prove weren't natural. Rachel has visited 3 different doctors in the past month, asking questions about dementia diagnosis and what kind of documentation is required for conservatorship. The fear I'd been pushing down since Tyler's warning bloomed fully in my chest. This wasn't just about money. This was about my life. What do? We set a trap. We give them what they think they want, in a controlled environment where we can document everything. Leonard arranged it. A meeting at his office, ostensibly to discuss updating my estate planning documents. I told David I wanted him there, and Rachel invited herself along, bringing Marcus. The conference room had cameras and audio recording equipment hidden in every corner, all perfectly legal since Leonard owned the space and had informed everyone they were being recorded for accuracy, buried in the standard paperwork they signed on arrival. Rachel and Marcus walked in looking confident, almost eager. Marcus was exactly the type I'd expected. Expensive suit, practiced smile, the kind of handshake that held on just a second too long. Mrs. Holloway, it's wonderful to finally meet you, he said. Rachel speaks so highly of you. We sat around the conference table. David looked confused about why Marcus was even there. Leonard had a stack of documents in front of him, blank forms that looked official. "Now," Leonard said, "Margaret has asked us to discuss some modifications to her estate plan. Rachel, you mentioned you had some thoughts?" Rachel leaned forward, her hand resting on David's arm. "We're just concerned about Margaret's welfare. She's been having some memory issues lately, haven't you, Margaret?" I blinked, playing along. "I'm sorry, what?" "You see?" Rachel gestured toward me. "Last week she forgot she'd invited us to dinner. She left the stove on twice that I know of. David's been worried sick." David frowned. "Mom, you didn't tell me." "Because I didn't want to worry you," Rachel interrupted smoothly. "But we need to face facts. Margaret needs more help than she's willing to admit." Marcus pulled out his own folder. "Mrs. Holloway, I've taken the liberty of preparing some documents that would make things easier for everyone. Power of attorney, so David can help manage your finances. And perhaps we should discuss a healthcare proxy, in case decisions need to be made." "That seems premature," Leonard said mildly. "Not at all," Rachel said. "Margaret, wouldn't it be easier to let David and me help you? We could manage everything, take the burden off your shoulders. Marcus has identified several investment opportunities that could really grow your portfolio before anything happens to you." "What kind of investments?" I asked, my voice deliberately wavering. Marcus smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "High-yield opportunities, time-sensitive. We'd need to move quickly, which is why the power of attorney is so crucial." "I see." I looked at Leonard. "Should I sign these papers?" "Actually," Leonard said, his voice hardening, "I don't think you should." Rachel's head snapped toward him. "Excuse me? I don't think Margaret should sign anything. In fact, I think this meeting is over." He stood up. "Mr. Rivera, you're a disbarred financial advisor with a history of elder exploitation. Miss Patterson, your real name is Rachel Winters, and you've been married 3 times before this, each time targeting wealthy families. You have a documented pattern of fraud, and you're currently under investigation in Florida for activities similar to what you're attempting here." The room went silent. David was staring at Rachel, his face pale. Rachel's mask had shattered, her expression pure fury. "You can't prove anything," she hissed. "Actually, we can. Every conversation you've had with Mr. Rivera in the past 3 months has been documented, thanks to phone records legally obtained during the investigation. Your attempts to find doctors willing to falsify dementia diagnoses are on record. Your plans to isolate Margaret and then, if necessary, arrange an accident are documented in text messages you thought were encrypted." Leonard gestured to the walls. "And this entire meeting has been recorded. You've just attempted to commit fraud in front of multiple witnesses." Marcus was already standing, moving toward the door. He didn't make it. 2 police officers stepped into the conference room. "Rachel Winters, Marcus Rivera, you're under arrest for attempted elder exploitation, fraud, and conspiracy." What happened next was almost anticlimactic. Rachel screamed, then cried, then tried to blame everything on Marcus. Marcus stayed silent, probably already calculating his legal defense. David sat frozen, staring at the woman he'd thought he knew. Later, much later, after the police had left and the lawyers had finished their initial paperwork, I sat with David in Leonard's office. Tyler was with a friend, safely away from the chaos. "I'm so sorry, Mom," David said. His voice was hollow. "I should have seen it, should have protected you." "You loved her," I said gently. "That's not something to apologize for." But Tyler saw it. An 8-year-old child saw what I couldn't. Tyler heard something that scared him, and he had the courage to speak up. That's what saved us. I took my son's hand. Children see things clearly sometimes. They don't have the filters adults develop, the ones that make us rationalize and excuse behavior because we want to believe the best of people. What do I tell him? The truth. That his mother made very bad choices, but that he was brave and smart, and he helped protect the people he loves. The legal aftermath took months. Rachel and Marcus were both convicted. Rachel was sentenced to 8 years in prison. The court granted David full custody of Tyler, and Rachel's parental rights were eventually terminated. My son had to rebuild his life, and it wasn't easy. But he did it, with help from friends and family and a good therapist who specialized in betrayal trauma. Tyler came to stay with me 3 afternoons a week while David was at work. We'd do homework together, bake cookies, work in the garden. He never asked about his mother, but sometimes I'd catch him looking at me with those old, wise eyes, and I knew he was making sure I was safe. One afternoon, about a year after Rachel's arrest, Tyler and I were planting tulip bulbs for spring. He looked up at me, dirt smudged on his cheek. "Grandma, I was scared you wouldn't believe me. When I told you about Mom," I set down my trowel and pulled him close. "I will always believe you, Tyler. Always. When someone you trust tells you something is wrong, you listen. That's how we protect each other. Is it weird that I don't really miss her?" "No, sweetheart, it's not weird. The person you thought she was never really existed. You're grieving someone who was never real. That's harder, in some ways, than grieving someone who was real and good." He nodded slowly, then went back to digging. After a moment, he said, "I'm glad I told you." "Me too, baby. Me too." I thought about that often in the months that followed, how close we'd come to disaster, how a child's courage and an old woman's willingness to listen had saved not just money, not just property, but lives and futures. I updated my estate plan, adding even more protections. I made sure David understood every aspect of our family finances, not to burden him but to make him aware, educated, prepared. I set up a trust fund for Tyler's education, properly secured this time against anyone who might try to exploit him in the future. But more than the legal protections, I changed how I lived. I stopped being so polite, so worried about seeming like a difficult mother-in-law. When something felt wrong, I said so. When someone's behavior didn't match their words, I paid attention. And I taught Tyler to do the same, to trust his instincts, to speak up even when it was scary, to understand that being kind didn't mean being naive, and that protecting the people you love sometimes meant asking difficult questions. On Tyler's 9th birthday, we were sitting on my back porch watching David grill burgers. Tyler leaned against me, comfortable and safe. "Grandma, can I tell you something?" My heart did that same flip it had done the day he'd warned me about Rachel. But when I looked at him, he was smiling. "What is it, sweetheart?" "I think we're going to be okay. All of us." I wrapped my arm around him. "I think so too." And watching my son flip burgers, hearing Tyler laugh at something his dad said, sitting in the home I'd built with Thomas all those years ago, I knew it was true. We'd been tested. We'd been targeted by people who saw us as nothing more than opportunities for exploitation. But we'd survived. And we'd done it by trusting each other, by refusing to let fear or embarrassment keep us silent, by understanding that real family means protecting each other no matter what. Tyler had been 8 years old when he'd whispered his warning to me. 8 years old, and he'd saved us all. Not because he was perfect or all-knowing, but because he'd paid attention, and he'd been brave enough to speak up. That's the lesson I hope stays with him, long after I'm gone. Listen, pay attention, and when something feels wrong, trust that instinct, because sometimes the smallest voice sees what everyone else misses, and sometimes that small voice is the one that saves everyone.